Nethercott, who's the executive producer behind a film called The Trade, which is in competition at our Berlin Festival. And the filmmaker behind it, if you don't mind me saying it, referring to it, is Matthew Burns, who unfortunately he can't be with us. But could you just, obviously just carry on, but can you just tell us, I know it's about seeing the film, but for the benefit of the people that haven't seen it, can you just give us a brief synopsis of what it is?
Yeah, about The Trade?
Yeah, about The Trade, yeah.
Well, The Trade is an autobiographical film about Matt, made by Matt. Matt, directed the film and edited it, and uses a lot of archival footage from when he was a kid and from when he was a deathmatch wrestler. And it's essentially the story of Matt and how he got into and then how he got out of deathmatch wrestling. And deathmatch wrestling is a kind of a subculture, a subset within professional wrestling.
Yeah.
The more popular professional wrestling, it's obviously staged and it's performance.
Yeah.
And deathmatch wrestling is too, but deathmatch wrestling involves a lot of dangerous.
It looks it does look bloody brutal to me.
It is bloody, and it is very bloody sometimes and brutal. And most of the people involved in deathmatch wrestling end up to be very broken people. I mean, broken
physically and mentally, I guess. Yeah.
Broken down physically, and often very serious injuries. Broken down emotionally, broken down mentally. I mean, they end up just in a very bad state.
And it's quite interesting that you mentioned that, because when I mentioned before the camera rolled, I did actually have the pleasure of speaking to Matt. I'm sure you won't mind me referring to him as Matt, but and he came across as very softly spoken. In fact, the way that you're talking is very much the way that it came across to him. I would never have guessed in a million years what his background, obviously, because of the film, but it was an interesting dynamic when I was speaking to him, and I remember thinking then, God, is this the guy that was? Because I would never put him to be that kind of physical person, And I mean that's the nature of people, of course. And again, I know we spoke very briefly about this, but can you just explain how you and he actually came to know one another?
Yeah, I through a mutual friend, I met Matt when I was visiting Minnesota 7-8 years ago, and it was one of those wonderful, fantastic, faithful meetings. We had coffee together and spent, I suppose, an hour and a half at the most together. And I said to him that day, I said, I think we're going to work together. I think we're going to do some work together someday, and I hope that works out or something like that. And he said, yeah, that sounds interesting. And we had a good time, but literally that's all the time I spent with him was about an hour. And then about a year later, the big disaster happened in Japan in 2011, and I was living in Tokyo at the time, and I jumped into disaster relief work, and I did fundraising and produced.
Is this for Fukushima we're talking about?
It was the tsunami, earthquake, nuclear disaster, so it was a triple disaster.
That's right, it all happened kind of at once.
Started with a major earthquake, which was one of the biggest earthquakes in the history of modern history, and then it caused a tsunami, and the tsunami caused nuclear disaster. So it was a bang, bang, bang. 3 disasters in a few hours. That is still deeply affecting Japan today, of course. So that happened in March of 2011, and I started disaster relief work hours after the disaster happened. And a few months later, I invited Matt to come and work with me in my department at Crash Japan, who I was working for, and
this has nothing to do with film at this moment. This is purely for the disaster.
Well, it was film work, because I invited Matt to come and join my team because I needed a good film guy. I needed someone that could do a good job with producing videos, with making videos, and doing the production stuff.
Right.
So Matt knows how to run a camera, and he's a good editor, and he was perfect. And he works like a maniac. And I mean, he arrived.
Well, he's super fit still, isn't he? I guess.
What?
He's super fit still, I guess. I mean, you have to be pretty fit, obviously, to do that.
You mean tenacious?
Physically fit.
He's very fit. He's very strong.
Yeah.
And one of the amazing, I call him Wolverine sometimes. Because, I mean, Matt is one of the strongest, most physically fit and capable people I've ever met.
Right.
He's very athletic and healthy. He's very healthy. I mean, he's not a big guy, but he's very strong. He can do amazing things physically. So he arrived in Japan, I don't remember what day of the week was, but he arrived like on a Friday, and Monday morning I set him up north with a bunch of people to be the shooter and to capture footage. And he was good to go. I mean, he was game to go, and he was just like that. He was ready to get to work and worked really hard and did really, really good film work for my department.
And when did the kernel for the idea of the trade, when did this kind of come about? Had you already thought about
this? I
this?
really can't answer that question. When he started thinking about making a film about himself, he started working on it seriously, I think, about 3 years ago.
Right.
That he started doing gathering footage and editing and, going through his old archival footage from when he was a kid and shooting home videos, and playing around with video cameras. And so it was about 3 years ago that he got serious about putting it together.
And I know, again, for the benefit of the people that haven't yet seen the film, why did you decide to do this autobiographical piece?
Again, I can't answer that question exactly because I haven't heard him say exactly, but I think my impression is, and my observation is, for him, it was an important process and something he needed to do to help make sense of his own life.
Right.
To understand himself better and to find meaning in some of the really difficult things that he did. I mean, deathmatch wrestling for him was a very, very dark time.
Mm.
I mean, he was putting himself in serious danger.
Is it still going on now? Is it still?
Oh yes.
It's still a big following.
Oh, yes. I think it's a little more regulated than it was when Matt was in it over 10 years ago. But it's still being done, yeah, in many places, in Europe and Japan and U.S. and South America too. I mean, it exists around the world, I believe.
And when the footage was coming together, and obviously you're starting to see the whole thing gain momentum and get built and put together, how are you feeling when you're going through? Because I know it's different to how Matt sees it because he lived it, and his take on it's going to be completely different to yours. But what were your impressions as you was going through this and seeing this all up on the screen?
Well, as I saw it happening, I did some relatively small things to help Matt along the way, let him use my car and, just facilitated things. I wasn't down in the trenches with him in terms of on a daily basis working on the film, but, I did what I could to facilitate what he was doing and give him time and encourage him. And one of my main roles with this film was submitting it to film festivals, which I submitted it to your festival, and I'm delighted to be here in Berlin and being part of the International Film Festival in Berlin here.
Thank you.
And it's really a great opportunity for me personally to meet fellow filmmakers and see films, and I love attending film festivals like this that are credible and well run and where good people are involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know what's the best one. I guess a lot of this is word of mouth now, but
well, I mean, I look at the reviews on Film Freeway and try to figure out, okay, is this a festival that I would like to attend and like to be involved with, and try to choose carefully. But you don't really know until you show up and get to meet people and get to know people, but I really appreciate your work on this festival, Steve, and is it Carl? Carl is the director. I got to chat with Carl yesterday and had a really good chat with him and a couple different times, and I think I'll be back. I hope to be back.
Yes,
and the trade, I think is honestly, I think it's an exceptionally good film. On the other hand, it's a very unusual film. It doesn't really fit in most any typical category. It's not a pure documentary. It's partly dramatized stuff. So it's kind of a hybrid between scripted and you know, using a lot of archival footage, which is typical documentary work. But it's got kind of this fantastical element to it, you know, kind of dreamy at times too, you know, with
Yeah, and I thought,
dancers and
yeah, I remember when I was, it's funny because you've hit exactly the nail on the head about something I was going to ask, which was when I saw it, I could see how this film could be nominated in both documentary and narrative feature because it is a hybrid. I mean, I've seen something, not on the same subject matter, I've seen something like this before, but it's rare. And it was kind of hard for me to sort of figure out which school this was trying to be, but obviously I realise it's deliberately made that way, but you can kind of understand why you could be split across two different sort of mediums, you know, because that's obviously the nature of the beast and that was deliberate. But it was interesting and it was very unusual, and I guess it's the kind of thing that sort of leads me on to my next question, which was going to be, have you ever done anything like this one? I suspect the answer is probably not, because it's so different. Maybe I'm not. Anything like this, yeah, I guess
before?
It's a bit of a one-off for you, is it?
Yeah, this is, I mean, it's a unique project.
Mm.
It's a unique film, which I love. And I think that's one of the strengths of the film, is that it is unique. No, I haven't been involved in anything else like it.
And I think, did you suggest, unless I'm completely mistaken, you've got something upcoming with Matt that you're looking at now, but that will be a narrative feature purely?
Well, we started, you know, I had a vision 5 years ago to make a film with two former gangsters that I met that were disaster relief volunteers called Two Criminals. And right now it looks like we just can't finish the film. We've run into a brick wall that I don't know how to get through.
Mm.
I was just encouraged by my filmmakers here at the festival a few minutes ago to, you know, somehow figure out how to get something done. And, you know, I'm going to be really thinking about that, because both of these filmmakers, you know, have films that they basically, you know, pulled out of the magician's black hat.
Well, Brian, as an example, and this is Brian you're referring to, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying, because I know the story, that he's literally bet his house on making a film, and that film, and I am interviewing him this week, and when he told me the story about what happened, I mean, it's unbelievable, and I'm sure he's told you, and you kind of think, and it gets back to what I said earlier, why I wouldn't be a filmmaker. When you hear that, you sort of think the drive and belief that people must have, and I'm sure you're included, because I think all filmmakers do have this drive, otherwise they wouldn't do it, is astounding. And, you know, who in their right mind would bet whatever X amount of pounds or dollars to get the production and it be your own money and you're selling your house to do it?
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
seriously?
You hinted at this earlier. You said you wouldn't want to be a filmmaker, but it's almost like you got to be a little bit crazy to be a filmmaker.
I think you have to be. Yeah.
And, yeah, it can be incredibly difficult. I mean, Matt wrote about 6 or 7 versions of the script, and we've polished it, and you know, we have a completed script, which was a finalist in one film festival. You know, I think we've got a strong script, and you know, but right now today it just doesn't look like it's possible to finish the film, and you know, it represents 5 years of work, and you know, to me, it is a tragedy of sorts, but I look back, and even if we can't finish the film, it wasn't a waste. I mean, I have learned so much through the process, and I've learned things, and I think Matt has too, that you can't learn any other way but by going through it. You know, you can talk about things, and you can hear things, but unless you walk through it and go through the process, you know, of trying and succeeding and failing and failing and succeeding, unless you go through that process, you're really just talking about it. You're not really at a deep level getting it. And I have learned so much through this process, and it's gonna help me make the films in the future I really want to make.
Sorry, I was saying, did you say, was your career choice earlier in life to be a filmmaker?
No, I started making films when I was almost 50 years old.
Right, okay.
You know, I was in my late 40s when I made my first film.
You know, the girl.
And I kind of stumbled into it. I mean, when I was a kid, I had an intense interest in film
Yeah.
and music, you know, audio stuff. I mean, very intense interest. But, you know, the opportunity when I was a kid to make films was extremely limited. I mean, you almost had to live in a place like Hollywood, Los Angeles area, or New York City. If you lived out of certain, you know, if you didn't have a lot of money and lived in the wrong place, your opportunity to get involved in film work was very, very small. I mean, it almost didn't exist except for very, very few people. And today,
Digital has changed everything.
anybody can do it.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah. All the qualities.
But the
better.
access, you know, if you want to get involved, you know, the door is wide open.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
definitely.
the obstacle to equipment. I mean, you can get. I mean, my iPhone, that's
Yeah,
over
yeah.
there, but my iPhone shoots in 4K.
I know, it's incredible.
And I mean, I can make a feature length film with my iPhone
Well, I mean, we all
with
have
just
now.
a few additional
Yeah.
pieces of equipment, and it's good enough footage that most people wouldn't notice the difference between that and a really expensive camera. You know,
And
so,
I've seen footage, and I've seen films that are made on,
yeah.
and it's astounding to see some of it. I've seen it. I know some of it's done in post, but even so, it's still an incredible
Yeah.
achievement.
Which doesn't mean it's easy to make a good film. I mean, I don't think it's basically hardly any easier to make a good film as it was 50 years ago. It's still a very challenging process to make a really good film. But the obstacle in terms of equipment is much lower. You know, it hardly exists anymore.
Yeah, definitely.
And
Oh.
and that's a big plus, and it opened up opportunity for me to start making films.
Well, I spoke to this young lady earlier, scriptwriter, and we were talking about exactly the same thing. And I said, I've met filmmakers that are in their 40s and 50s that were accountants, solicitors, lawyers, you name it, every walk of life that have come to filmmaking later. And she just asked why, and I said, well, there's all sorts of reasons, but one of the reasons that came along a lot, was quite prevalent, was they always wanted to do something creative, but they never had the money then, and they had the career kind of mapped out, and they wanted to bring the money in first, and then they got to a certain point in life, and they're like, shit, what am I, you know, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. I mean, there could be a ton of reasons, but that was quite an overriding theme that came through. So it's not rare, certainly with my experience here, of meeting people, they're in their 40s and 50s that have had a big career
Yeah.
change. And it's quite refreshing because, you know, I've got an accountant, and I'm sure accountants do earn good money, and they're very interesting people, but it's not particularly creative, is it? Frankly, unless you're a creative
Well,
accountant.
You know, I love stories. I mean, I love films. I've been an avid, you know, since I was a kid, I was an avid reader of stories like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and science fiction stories, Asimov. I mean, I read every science fiction book in my school
Yeah,
library. I mean, I
yeah.
love stories and fantasy, and science fiction was captivating towards me. And you know, getting to be involved in the adventure of making films. I mean, it's something I love to do, and it is a grand adventure, full of challenges. And you know, if we want a grand adventure, I mean, a grand adventure doesn't exist without challenges. If you don't have challenges, there's no grand adventure. It's not an adventure anymore.
Yeah.
You know, so if we want a really peaceful, easy, you know, uneventful life, you know, get a job in a factory where you do the same thing every day, all day, and you're just, you know, punching your card, and you're going in, and you're standing there, and you're doing something, and there's no adventure to it. You can do the same thing every day for 30 years. These jobs don't exist as much as they used to, but, you know, and there's no adventure, there's virtually no challenge.
Yeah.
It's really easy and it's boring, but, you know, I really do like an adventure, and filmmaking is a way for me to travel, meet people, work with people, and have a grand adventure. And you know, even the hard things about it, I think there's part of me that kind of enjoys that too. It's like, wow, this is really interesting, you know, to see how people react and what they do and what they don't do, and
Yeah, I know.
you know,
I
because
don't- yeah, I know exactly what
when
you
you
mean.
show up on a film set, you really, I mean, anybody that's honest, I think, will say the same thing. You really don't know what's going to happen that day until it happens. And it's true with a documentary film and a scripted film too. I mean, and I kind of object to the idea that they call narrative films, you know, a scripted film is called a narrative film because a documentary is also a narrative.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But you know, with documentaries, you never know what people are going to say and do. You don't know what's going to happen until it happens. And it's an adventure. You know, it's really, really interesting. It's almost completely unpredictable. I mean, you have an idea, and you meet someone like I met a lady, and I found out about a lady on Facebook. This was 5 years ago in Japan. We made a film about her, and it turned out fantastic. And Matt directed that film, and you know, shot footage for the film. And you know, when it turns out like that, it's like, wow, this was amazing. You know. And sometimes it works out like that, and sometimes it doesn't. You just really can't predict ahead of time how it's going to go.
Thing is, if it was easy, we'd all do it, I guess.
Yeah, if it was easy, everybody would do it, and would always. And every film Hollywood makes would make $1 billion.
Yeah.
You know, Hollywood would never make a flop if it was easy.
And who knows what who knows?
Even for Hollywood, it's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, there's no formula. I mean, that's the beauty of it, I guess, isn't it? And the films that I've seen that we've all seen films that you thought would never make a dime have gone on to be huge films, and films that cost a ton of money didn't make any money back.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, they can't. Even Hollywood can't. Are absolutely guarantee they can't predict.
No.
They can't make it happen every time where, you know, it's financially successful. Can't do it. So why should I expect everything to turn out that I, you know, try to do in terms of filmmaking? You know, it would be delusional for me to expect it always to go smoothly and easily and
It would be nice.
be nice.
It would be nice.
Yeah, it would be. Well, in a way, it would be nice, but it would also take away the adventure of it.
Yeah.
You know, because if it's really that easy, there really is no adventure. It's not, and it's not interesting. But you know, a little change of subject here, and you know, my fellow filmmakers here brought this up. You know, the trade doesn't really say anything about Matt's current life and how he's done since he got out of deathmatch wrestling, but he has really built a good life for himself. I mean, he has friends. He got out of deathmatch wrestling 10 years ago. He's writing scripts. He's making films. He did disaster relief work in Japan and did absolutely just really good work for you know, raising money and telling the stories, telling stories related to the disaster in Japan, which helped us mobilize thousands of volunteers and raise millions of dollars of aid for Japan.
That's brilliant.
And you know, Matt's video work was a crucial part of the work that my department did in telling those stories. It helped us mobilize volunteers and raise funds.
That's great.
And we produced, I don't remember the exact number, at least 40 videos. You know, newscast type videos, personal stories about volunteers, stories about pastors that, you know, were working with their local communities, and stories about survivors, you know, and I'm so proud of the work we did.
Brilliant.
Matt did a 1-year anniversary video that was just phenomenal. And he worked like a maniac on it. I mean, he worked a couple 100 hours on it probably with editing, and turned out fantastic. Just really a great piece. So, you know, that's the kind of work Matt's doing now. He left behind that incredibly negative, dark deathmatch wrestling, and he's doing really good things with his life now. He's in Los Angeles right now and doing acting work. I haven't had a chance to talk to him in a while because of cell phone coverage issues, but
yeah, like I said, he was literally, I got hold of him and he just happened to have come off set, and it was something like 2 o'clock in the morning his time.
Oh really?
Yeah, and that's, in fact, definitely, because it was, I remember it was like 2 o'clock, it was like 10 a.m. UK time, and he just said, oh, thanks for the email, Steve. And then we chatted, and then that's when I remember thinking, you know, just a really, it's not how I'd imagined him to be.
Yeah. Well, no, Matt actually is a very sensitive person. And I think his sensitivity is what got him into deathmatch wrestling too. It sounds kind of weird, but you know, sensitive people get hurt and they can get really angry.
Mm.
And I think his anger and hurt came out in that way. Matt is very kind and very sensitive. He's very soft-hearted. He's not a mean person.
No.
And you know, his deathmatch wrestling persona was a mean, sick guy, but that's not really who he is.
No. I love it. I mean, it's acting, isn't it?
It was an act. However, it did reflect a side of him, and I think he was just trying to deal with all the difficult issues of life we all deal with. You know, hurt and loss, and figuring out who he was, and he's physically very capable, and I think that drew him to doing that stuff because, I mean, you've seen the trade, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can clearly see he's incredibly good at what he did.
Yeah.
I mean, he's acrobatic.
Oh yeah, like I said,
like
he's very fit. I mean,
when I first met him, he'd been in China for 6 weeks studying kung fu. You know, he's a pretty accomplished martial arts practitioner. I mean, he knows the moves, and I mean, he did amazing things in these deathmatch wrestling ring. He did incredible acrobatics and survived them, partly because he's so athletic.
Yeah.
So I think the physicality of it really attracted him. And then he got trapped by the adrenaline rush that you get when you do really dangerous things like that.
Yeah, and that is quite common.
But the remarkable thing about Matt in his story is that he got out. He walked away from it, and that's extremely unusual. Most of these guys end up broken down, you know, just destroyed. And Matt is, I call him Wolverine sometimes because he just has
back,
incredible ability to heal. His body seems to have more healing capability than most people, because he experienced injuries and experienced stuff that should have really hurt him. And he was injured many times, but he healed. So he's got some special healing ability, and he's healthy and strong and physically fit, and like I said, one of the strongest people I know, so it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, Matt's a really, really impressive person. And I think he's going to, I think he has a very bright future ahead of him in film. He's acting in Hollywood right now. He was on the Law and Order set when you talked to him.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know the details, but he had some role in Law and Order, and is doing other acting gigs and writing, and I think Matt's got a very bright future ahead of him.
Brilliant. Paul, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That was wonderful.
I don't think I was worried about Matt or concerned about Matt growing up, but I definitely saw signs of darkness.
I whispered over, fear the bison! Which is basically a bump that inspired me to be as crazy as I am today.